There was a smell to Saturday mornings that you cannot replicate. Not manufactured, not bottled, not sold in any shop that exists today. It was the smell of coal smoke drifting down from the chimney breast, of strong tea stewing too long in a brown ceramic pot, of yesterday's newspaper still folded on the arm of the settee, and underneath all of it fainter, but absolutely there, the faint papery, slightly waxy smell of the coupon. That pale green or cream-colored sheet of paper that arrived through the letterbox midweek, ready and waiting. The football pool's coupon. In our house, my dad treated that piece of paper with a reverence that I did not fully understand until I was much older. He didn't scribble on it, he sat down with it. He cleared the table, first moved the sauce bottle, folded the cloth, and he sat down with a cup of tea and a freshly sharpened pencil, and he studied it the way a scholar might study a text. Because to him, and to millions of men and women exactly like him, it was not a bit of paper, it was a door. A door that, on any given Saturday, could theoretically open into a life that was not this one. That is what the football pools were. And if you didn't grow up with them, if you came of age after 1994, then I genuinely don't think you can understand the emotional architecture of a British Saturday without understanding what we lost when they went. The pools were not gambling in the way that word carries its ugly modern weight, the flashing screens, the addictive algorithms, the betting shops on every corner with their strip-lit misery. The pools were a ritual. They were woven into the fabric of working-class life in this country from the 1920s right through to the early 1990s, and at their absolute peak, through the 1960s and into the 1970s, more than 10 million households in Britain were entering the pools every single week. 10 million. In a country of roughly 55 million people at that time. That means you would struggle to find a street, a terrace, a council estate, a pit village, or a mill town where someone wasn't filling one in. It was as British as the milk tray man, as the test card, as the 2-bar electric fire glowing orange in the corner. It was just what you did on a Saturday. The mechanics of it were straightforward enough, though the hope it contained was anything but. The main game, the one everybody played, the one my dad played, the one your nan probably played, was the treble chance. You look down that coupon at the list of that weekend's First Division, Second Division, Third Division football matches, 40 or 50 of them, all printed in those tight little columns, and you had to select 8 matches that you predicted would end as score draws. Not a home win, not an away win. A score draw 1-all, 2-all, 3-2. That precise, gloriously unpredictable outcome. If all 8 of your selections ended as score draws, you won the jackpot. Or at least, you shared it, because the winnings were pooled. That is literally where the name comes from, divided among everyone who got the maximum points that week. On a bumper week, when few people got the top score, a single winner could walk away with hundreds of thousands of pounds. In the early 1960s, that was a sum so enormous it was almost incomprehensible to a man earning 12 or 13 pounds a week on the factory floor or down the pit. The 3 great names, Littlewoods, Vernon's, and Cope's, were the empires built on that hope. Littlewoods was the Titan, founded by John Moores in Liverpool in 1923. Moores started it almost as a sideline, printing the first coupons himself, employing boys to hand them out at Old Trafford Football Ground. The Football Association and the Football League loathed the whole enterprise from the start. They tried to ban clubs from publishing fixture lists to starve the pools of its data, but Moores was tenacious and the public appetite was insatiable. And within a few years, Littlewoods Pools was an industry. By the time my dad was a young man in the 1950s, it employed tens of thousands of people, most of them women, in vast offices in Liverpool, checking coupons, processing the entries, totting up the points by hand. Vernon's was the great rival, also Liverpool-based. The city of Liverpool built enormous portions of its post-war white-collar employment on the back of football dreams. Cope's was smaller, a Birmingham firm, but loyal customers would swear by it. You picked your firm and you stuck with it the way you picked your football team. It wasn't casual, it was affiliation. The coupon itself was a weekly fixed point in a life that otherwise offered very few of them. My mam used to say that the Coleman coming on a Monday, the rent man coming on a Friday, and the Pools coupon coming on a Wednesday were the three things you could absolutely count on. The pools collector, often a bloke from the same street or the next estate, would come round door to door on a Thursday or Friday to collect the completed coupons and the entry money. That entry money was almost nothing. You could enter for as little as a few old pennies in the early days, and even by the 1970s, you were talking about perhaps 20 or 30 pence for a modest perm entry. A perm, a permutation, meant you weren't just selecting one fixed set of 8 matches. You were permuting across 10 or 12 selections, covering multiple combinations, which dramatically improved your chances of hitting the treble chance but cost you proportionally more. Serious players studied permutation systems the way card players study probability. There were books published about it. Newspaper tipsters ran pools, columns. Whole cottage industries existed around the pursuit of the 8-score draw. And then came Saturday afternoon. That is when the ritual reached its crescendo. The football results came through on the BBC at around 5 o'clock. Grandstand, the television program that anchored the entire sporting Saturday, and the classified results were read out in that utterly distinctive, flat, almost liturgical monotone that every child of a certain generation can still hear in their head. Coventry City won. Manchester United won. You didn't cheer at score draws. You held your breath. You held the coupon in your hand and you ran your pencil down it as the results came in. And each score draw that matched one of your 8 selections was a small, private triumph that kept the dream alive for another 60 seconds. My dad would sit absolutely still during the results. Ma'am knew not to speak to him. We knew not to speak to him. The telly was turned up, the coupon was on his knee, and for those 15 or 20 minutes, he was entirely inside that other life, the one where this was the week, the one where everything changed. It almost never was the week, of course. Week after week after week, it wasn't the week. But it might be next week, and that was enough. What was your absolute favorite part of that Saturday ritual? Was it filling in the coupon on a Wednesday night? Was it hearing those results come through? Or was it something else entirely? Let me know down in the comments, because I genuinely believe there are memories attached to this that people have never had the chance to speak out loud. The winter of 1963 produced one of the most extraordinary footnotes in British sporting and social history, and it came directly from the football pools. In the third week of December 1962, Britain was struck by one of the most severe winters ever recorded in these islands. The temperature plummeted and did not recover for months. The Big Freeze, as it came to be called, gripped the country from Boxing Day 1962 right through to early March 1963, a period of approximately 66 days during which snow and ice made almost all outdoor sporting activity impossible. The River Thames partially froze. Snowdrifts blocked roads across the North and the Midlands, and week after week after week, the football fixtures were postponed. Entire weekends passed without a single First Division match being played. Some clubs went 2 months without kicking a ball. For the football pools companies, this was a crisis of existential proportions. Their entire business model, their legal standing, in fact, as a competition rather than a betting operation, depended on the results of actual football matches. No matches, no results. No results, no pools. They could not simply cancel the competition or refund the millions of entries already received. The legal and commercial implications would have been devastating. So the football pools companies, in consultation with the Football League, devised a solution that was, depending on your perspective, either a stroke of genius or an act of magnificent audacity. They created the Pools Panel. A group of football experts, former players and managers of genuine distinction, would convene on the Saturday morning and, for each postponed match, predict what the result would have been had it been played. They would deliberate, discuss, and vote, and their invented result would stand as the official result for pools purposes. The first Pools Panel sat on the 26th of January 1963 at the Connaught Rooms in London. The original members included men of serious football credibility: Tom Finney, Ted Drake, Tommy Lawton, and the former referee Arthur Ellis among them. They sat around a table, they considered the form and home advantage of each postponed fixture, and they produced results from thin air. Legitimate results. results that paid out real money to real winners. There is something both wonderful and quietly surreal about that image, a group of serious-faced men in suits in a formal London meeting room in the grip of the coldest winter in 2 centuries, inventing the scores of football matches that were never played so that the dreams of 10 million British households could remain intact for another week. The pools panel was not a temporary measure. It proved so practical and so legally robust that it was retained permanently, used whenever fixtures were called off due to bad weather or other circumstances, right up until the pools effectively ceased to matter. It became an institution within an institution, a second layer of ritual, a backup dream machine, quietly humming away in a function room somewhere in London whenever the weather turned savage or the pitches froze solid. The decades rolled on, and the pools rolled with them, though not without their changes. Through the late 1960s and the 1970s, the jackpots grew larger, and the culture around the pools deepened. Stories of winners, real, verified winners, their names published in the newspapers sustained the faith of the millions who never won a penny. Viv Nicholson, who won over £150,000 on Littlewoods in 1961, a sum equivalent to several millions, in today's money became a tabloid legend, partly for her win and partly for her subsequent declaration that she intended to spend, spend, spend. Her story, with all its subsequent tragedy and heartbreak, was nonetheless proof that it could happen to someone from Castleford, from a council house, from nothing. That was the fuel. Not the statistical probability. Anyone who thought rationally about a treble chance permutation understood the odds were steep, but the human proof. Viv Nicholson was real. She was from a place like your place. She was from people like your people. And she won. The pool's coupon collectors became figures of quiet neighborhood importance in this era. In many working-class communities, the same collector had been doing the same round for 20 or 30 years. He knew which houses had changed their permutation, which widow had dropped her entry after her husband died, which young couple had just moved in and needed explaining to. He was not just a transaction. He was a connection, a weekly human contact that mattered especially for older people living alone. You handed him your coupon and your coins, and you exchanged a few words about last week's results, about that disallowed goal that had cost you a full house, about whether the pitch at Filbert Street would hold up this weekend. It was small talk, but it was warm small talk. And it was reliable. And in a world that offered precious little reliability to people without money or position, reliability was not a small thing. The 1980s brought the first serious tremors beneath the foundations. Attendances at football grounds had been falling since the late 1970s hooliganism, decaying stadiums, the grim industrial backdrop of Thatcher's Britain, and as the game's public image darkened, the pools began to feel slightly old-fashioned. Television football was changing, slowly at first. There was talk of a satellite revolution coming. The demographics of the pools player were aging, and the younger generation was finding different things to spend its 50 pence on. The pools companies tried to modernize glossier coupons, new game formats, telephone entry lines, but the essential product, the treble chance on Saturday scores, was the same product it had always been, and the world around it was shifting in ways that product could not fully accommodate. The entry fees had remained modest throughout the decades, held down partly by competition between the firms and partly by the sheer volume of players' 10 million households. Paying even a small sum each adds up to an enormous pool of prize money and company revenue. But modest revenue per customer meant the pools companies were always vulnerable to any competitor that could offer a bigger dream for a similar outlay. And in November 1994, that competitor arrived. The National Lottery launched on the 14th of November 1994, with a televised draw hosted by Noel Edmonds, and within weeks it had fundamentally and permanently altered the British relationship with organized hope. The lottery offered jackpots of millions, not hundreds of thousands, but millions paid to a single ticket holder, with a draw twice a week, with instant gratification, with scratch cards available at every newsagent and petrol station and supermarket checkout. You didn't need to know anything about football. You didn't need to wait until Saturday. You didn't need a collector to come round on Thursday. You just picked 6 numbers. The pools couldn't compete with that simplicity, and it couldn't compete with those jackpot numbers, and it knew it almost immediately. The decline was not slow. Between 1994 and 1997, the number of regular pools players fell from somewhere around 6 to 7 million households down to under 2 million. Littlewoods, Vernons, and Copes all struggled desperately. Redundancies followed at the great Liverpool Pools offices, thousands of jobs gone in just a few years. The human infrastructure of a 70-year-old industry dismantled with a speed that felt brutal. The pools companies tried every conceivable adaptation: internet entry, new prize structures, charity tie-ins. Vernon's and Littlewoods eventually merged their pools operations. Copes wound down. By the mid-2000s, the pools were a ghost of themselves, still technically operating, still drawing a small and aging cohort of loyal players, but culturally invisible, stripped of all the weight and meaning they had once carried. The coupon collectors were gone from the doorsteps. The classified results on Grandstand were gone, replaced by rolling Sky Sports updates. The spare bedroom where Dad kept his permutation books was cleared out. What was lost was not merely a product or a company or even an industry, though all of those things were lost. What was lost was the particular quality of that Saturday, waiting the specific emotional texture of filling in the coupon at the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening, of handing it to the collector on Thursday, of listening to those results in that flat television voice on a winter Saturday afternoon, of checking each one against your 8 selections with a pencil and a racing heart. The lottery gave you a ticket with numbers on it. You watched a machine spit out colored balls. There was no knowledge required, no engagement with the sporting world, no shared language with your neighbor about whether Burnley away was a score draw prospect. There was no ritual. There was just a transaction and a result, and almost always disappointment. The form was identical to what the pools had offered: hope, money staked, outcome awaited, but the content was utterly different. The pools were embedded in football, which was embedded in community, which was embedded in identity. To play the pools was to be part of something larger than yourself, to participate in a national conversation that took place in front rooms and at factory gates and across garden walls every single Saturday for 7 decades. The lottery offered no such thing. It offered only the dream, stripped of all the ceremony that had made the dream worth dreaming. There is a generation of people in this country, my generation, their children, their parents, for whom the smell of a pools coupon is inseparable from the smell of home, from the particular quality of Saturday afternoon light through net curtains, from the sound of the football scores being read, from the sight of a man bent over a table with a pencil, concentrating harder than he ever concentrated at work, because at work he had no choice, and at the table with the coupon he was choosing, he was participating in the possibility of transformation. He was not passive, he was hopeful. And there is a dignity in that which should not be underestimated, and which was not replaced by anything when it was taken away. The dream never came for my dad. Not the big one. He had small wins over the years, a few quid here and there, enough to buy a round or take Mam to the pictures, but the treble chance jackpot, the life-changing sum, the open door that never materialized. He filled in his coupon until the collectors stopped coming round. He switched to the lottery for a few years, without enthusiasm, without ritual, without that particular Wednesday evening concentration. It wasn't the same, and he knew it wasn't the same, and he never really pretended otherwise. He died in 2002. I found 3 old pools coupons in the sideboard drawer when we cleared the house, still folded, still bearing his pencil marks, the selections circled in that careful hand. I couldn't throw them away. I still can't. We like to talk about what progress takes from us in abstract terms: community, tradition, the social fabric. But sometimes it takes something very specific. Sometimes it takes a pale green piece of paper that arrived on a Wednesday and disappeared on a Saturday, and all the hope that lived inside those 2.5 days between the posting and the checking. We swapped it for a lottery ticket bought in 30 seconds at a self-service checkout. I am not here to tell you that was the wrong choice for the country, because I am not sure it was. But I am telling you, I know it was a loss, not of money, of something far harder to replace, of the particular British genius for packaging, hope in something modest, something affordable, something you did together, side by side, in a small room that smelled of coal smoke and strong tea, on a gray and ordinary Saturday afternoon in a life that deserved far better than it usually got.